She was sitting alone on a cold sidewalk, overlooked by the bustling city. Then, suddenly she was transformed, stepping into a dazzling high society wedding, looking stunning in an elegant gown, escorted by a wealthy millionaire. But this wasn't a Cinderella story. He hadn't rescued her, he had rented her. His motive? Cold, hard revenge. He wanted to crash his ex-fiancée's wedding and humiliate her by bringing the most unlikely date imaginable. He thought paying a homeless woman to play the part was a stroke of cruel genius, a perfect way to cause a scene and show he didn't care. But this millionaire, consumed by bitterness, made a massive miscalculation. He knew nothing about the woman he'd chosen, the quiet strength hidden beneath her worn exterior, the unexpected depth of her character. He never predicted that her actions would be the ones to leave every guest utterly stunned, turning his spiteful plan completely upside down and forcing him to confront the truth about himself. This is a story about prejudice, the surprising power of kindness, and a night that shattered everyone's expectations. Ethan Thorne lived in a world most people only dream about. His penthouse apartment offered breathtaking city views. His garage housed a collection of cars that cost more than most houses, and his bank account held numbers with more zeros than he could count. He had built a tech empire from the ground up, earning him a reputation as a brilliant, if somewhat ruthless, businessman. By all outward appearances, Ethan had it all. But behind the gleaming facade of success, Ethan was deeply unhappy. Money, he was discovering, couldn't buy everything. It couldn't mend a broken heart, and it certainly couldn't erase the sting of betrayal. Just 6 months prior, his fiancée, Sophia, had abruptly called off their engagement. It wasn't just the breakup that wounded him. It was who she left him for, Mark Ashton, Ethan's former business partner and now his fiercest rival. The wound was still raw, festering with anger and humiliation. He saw Sophia and Mark's engagement photos splashed across social media, heard whispers about their whirlwind romance, and felt a bitter resentment churning inside him. Then, the ultimate insult arrived in the mail, a thick cream-colored envelope containing an invitation to Sophia and Mark's wedding. Staring at the elegant invitation, Ethan felt a cold fury replace the initial shock. He wasn't just going to decline politely. He wasn't going to simply ignore it. No, he wanted revenge. He wanted to walk into that wedding and shatter their perfect day. He wanted to show Sophia, Mark, and their entire circle of judgmental friends that he was fine, that he was better off, that he didn't care. Even though, deep down, he cared immensely. He needed a plan. Something audacious, something that would make everyone gasp, something they would never forget. Ethan's mind raced as he drove aimlessly through the city, the wedding invitation burning a hole in his pocket. How could he inflict the maximum amount of discomfort, the most significant social disruption? Attending alone would look pathetic. Bringing a stunning model would look like he was trying too hard. No, he needed something unexpected. Something that would truly rattle the gilded cage of Sophia's high society friends. His plan began to crystallize, cruel and calculated. He wouldn't bring someone from their world. He'd bring someone from the complete opposite end of the spectrum, someone whose very presence would be a slap in the face to their carefully curated image of perfection, someone they couldn't ignore, someone who would make them squirm. He turned his expensive sports car down streets he usually avoided, cruising through neighborhoods where the city's gloss faded into grittier reality. He scanned the sidewalks, looking for the perfect pawn for his game. Then he saw her. She was sitting on a worn blanket near the entrance of a homeless shelter, reading a tattered paperback book. Her clothes were faded and clearly secondhand, her hair pulled back simply. But there was something about her posture, a quiet dignity that caught his eye even amidst her obvious hardship. She looked tired, perhaps hungry, but not broken. She was used to being invisible, a face in the crowd that people hurried past without a second glance. This was perfect, Ethan thought with a cynical smirk. He pulled his car over to the curb, the engine humming softly, a stark contrast to the surrounding environment. He lowered the tinted window, leaning across the passenger seat. "Excuse me, miss," he called out, adopting a tone that was meant to sound charming, but came across as deeply condescending. "I have a proposition for you, a business arrangement, if you will." The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes, clear and intelligent despite her circumstances, narrowed slightly as she took in the expensive car and the man inside. This was unusual. People like him didn't usually stop, let alone speak to her. Ethan got out of the car, leaving the engine running. He approached her, careful to keep a slight distance. "I need a date for an event," he explained smoothly. "A wedding, actually. It's black tie. I'd need you to accompany me, look presentable, perhaps make some polite conversation." The woman, Sarah, watched him warily. "Why me?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "What's the catch?" She wasn't naive. She knew propositions like this rarely came without strings attached, especially from men who looked like him. Ethan gave a dismissive wave of his hand. "No catch, just a simple job for one evening. I'll provide the clothes, hair, makeup, the works. You get to attend a lavish party, eat good food, and wear a beautiful dress. And, of course," he added, pulling out his wallet, "you'll be compensated very generously for your time." He mentioned a figure that made Sarah's eyes widen slightly. It was more money than she had seen in many months, enough to potentially secure a deposit on a small room, a chance to get off the streets. She hesitated, torn. His motives felt murky, dishonest. She sensed he wasn't being entirely truthful about why he wanted her specifically. Yet, the offer was incredibly tempting. The money could be a lifeline. The thought of a warm meal, a beautiful dress, even just for one night, felt like a fantasy. "Just pretend to be my date for one night?" she clarified, still hesitant. "Exactly," Ethan confirmed, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Simple as that. What do you say?" Driven by a desperate need for a way out of her current situation, and perhaps a flicker of curiosity about this strange man and his even stranger request, Sarah took a deep breath. She looked at the money Ethan held out, then back at his expectant face. Reluctantly, cautiously, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I'll do it." Ethan's smirk widened. His plan was falling perfectly into place. Ethan spared no expense transforming Sarah for the wedding. For him, it wasn't about making her feel good. It was about crafting the perfect prop for his revenge plot. He whisked her away to the most exclusive boutiques, places where price tags were whispered rather than displayed. He pointed dismissively at racks of designer gowns, instructing assistants to find something elegant but not too flashy. Believable, you understand. Sarah endured the fittings silently. She was poked, prodded, and measured, assistants fluttering around her with pins and tape measures. She looked uncomfortable under the scrutiny, unused to such focused attention, especially attention driven by someone else's agenda. She chose a simple, yet undeniably beautiful, deep emerald green gown, one that complemented her quiet grace rather than overwhelming it. Next came the hair and makeup artists, summoned to Ethan's penthouse. They worked for hours, styling her hair into soft waves and applying makeup that enhanced her natural features without being overly dramatic. Through it all, Sarah remained quiet, observant. She watched the process with a detached curiosity, like an anthropologist studying a strange ritual. The luxurious surroundings, the expensive products, the constant fuss. None of it seemed to faze her or impress her. Ethan observed the transformation from a distance, sipping expensive scotch. He had to admit, the results were impressive. The woman emerging was almost unrecognizable from the one he'd met on the street corner. She looked stunning, poised, elegant. But to him, she was still just Sarah, the homeless woman, dressed up in borrowed finery. He barely spoke to her, offering only curt instructions or dismissive nods. He saw the dress, the makeup, the hairstyle. He didn't truly see her. He was too wrapped up in his own bitterness, too focused on the impending wedding, to notice the quiet strength and dignity that radiated from Sarah, regardless of her attire. The transformation was complete, but only on the surface. The wedding reception was everything Ethan had expected, obscenely lavish, ostentatiously grand, and suffocatingly pretentious. Held in the city's most exclusive ballroom, the space glittered with crystal chandeliers, overflowed with extravagant floral arrangements, and buzzed with the forced laughter and whispered gossip of the city's elite. This was Sophia's world, the world she had chosen over him, and Ethan felt a fresh wave of bitterness wash over him as he stepped out of his limousine. On his arm was Sarah. Transformed by the designer gown, elegant hair, and subtle makeup, she looked undeniably beautiful, but more than that, she carried herself with a quiet composure, an unshakable dignity that seemed almost out of place amidst the artificiality of the event. Ethan, however, barely noticed. He was too focused on the impact they were about to make. As they entered the grand ballroom, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversations paused mid-sentence, heads turned, and all eyes fixed on the unlikely couple. Ethan felt a surge of perverse satisfaction as he saw the ripples of shock and confusion spread through the room. This was exactly what he wanted. The whispers started almost immediately, quiet but persistent, like the rustling of silk dresses. "Who is that with Ethan?" someone murmured behind a champagne flute. "Where did he find her?" another hissed, their eyes raking over Sarah with undisguised judgment. "She doesn't look like his usual type," a third commented cattily, glancing towards a group of Sophia's perfectly polished friends. The stares were relentless, a mixture of curiosity, disapproval, and barely concealed disdain. Some guests looked merely confused, unable to place Sarah within their familiar social circles. Others were openly judgmental, their expressions conveying a clear message: she doesn't belong here. Ethan caught sight of Sophia across the room, standing beside her new husband, Mark Ashton. Sophia's smile faltered for a split second as she saw him, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly before she quickly composed herself, adopting an air of studied indifference. Mark simply looked annoyed, his jaw tightening as he saw his rival. Ethan smirked inwardly. His plan was working perfectly. He was the center of attention, the subject of gossip, and he had clearly unsettled Sophia. He tightened his grip on Sarah's arm, steering her further into the room, towards the heart of the lion's den. He felt a sense of power, of control, enjoying the discomfort he was causing. He guided Sarah towards the bar, preparing for the next phase of his spiteful performance, completely oblivious to the fact that the real performance, the one that would truly shock everyone, was about to come from the woman standing quietly by his side. As the evening wore on, Ethan continued to observe Sarah, a growing sense of cognitive dissonance warring within him. His plan relied on her being awkward, out of place, embarrassing. Instead, she moved through the glittering crowd with a quiet grace that commanded a different kind of attention. She deflected snide remarks with polite indifference, offered genuine smiles to the staff, and engaged in thoughtful conversations, revealing an intelligence and depth that completely contradicted Ethan's shallow assumptions. He found himself watching her, not with the detached amusement he'd intended, but with a confusing mix of surprise and grudging respect. His internal conflict came to a head when Sophia finally approached them, her new husband Mark trailing possessively behind her. Sophia glided towards them, a predatory smile playing on her lips. She couldn't resist the opportunity to twist the knife, to assert her victory. "Ethan, darling," she purred, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that barely concealed her malice. "Quite the surprise seeing you here. We weren't sure you'd come." Her eyes flicked dismissively over Sarah. "And who is your lovely friend?" Ethan felt a familiar surge of anger towards Sophia, but before he could respond with the sarcastic retort he'd mentally rehearsed, Sarah stepped forward slightly. Her posture was poised, her gaze steady as she met Sophia's condescending stare. "My name is Sarah," she said calmly, her voice clear and even. "Ethan was kind enough to invite me." Sophia let out a tinkling artificial laugh, looking Sarah up and down with blatant disdain. "Kind? Or desperate? I heard you literally picked her up off the street, Ethan. Honestly, how pathetic can you get? Trying to hurt me by bringing this?" She gestured vaguely towards Sarah, as if she were an unpleasant object. A collective gasp went through the nearby guests who had been eavesdropping. The accusation hung in the air, raw and ugly. Ethan felt his face flush with shame and embarrassment, not just for himself, but for Sarah. He saw the flicker of hurt in Sarah's eyes, though she quickly masked it with her usual composure. In that moment, something snapped within Ethan. The bitterness, the need for revenge, suddenly felt petty and meaningless compared to the cruelty Sophia was displaying, the cruelty he had orchestrated. He saw Sarah, not as the pawn in his game, but as a human being who had been subjected to humiliation simply because he was hurting. "That's enough, Sophia," Ethan said, his voice low and sharp, cutting through Sophia's smugness. Everyone turned, surprised by his tone. "Sarah is my guest, and she deserves respect. Far more respect than some people in this room seem capable of showing." He looked directly at Sophia, his eyes cold. "And frankly, she's shown more class, more dignity, and more genuine kindness tonight than I've seen from you in years." The entire group was stunned into silence. Sophia looked as though she'd been slapped. Mark Ashton stepped forward defensively, but Ethan ignored him. He had defended Sarah, instinctively, genuinely. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. His plan had backfired, not because Sarah had embarrassed him, but because her quiet strength and inherent goodness had embarrassed him. He saw his own actions, his own motivations laid bare, and he was deeply ashamed. The game was over, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold in his own heart. They left the wedding soon after the confrontation, slipping out quietly while the gossip still buzzed behind them. The ride back in Ethan's luxurious car was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The air was no longer thick with unspoken judgment and Ethan's selfish agenda, but with a heavy mix of awkwardness, regret, and a surprising, fragile sense of connection. Ethan finally broke the silence as they pulled up near the shelter where he had first found Sarah. He turned off the engine and faced her, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. "Sarah," he began, his voice quiet, hesitant, "I am so incredibly sorry for everything, for using you tonight, for the whole ridiculous, cruel plan. It was wrong, deeply wrong. You deserve none of that disrespect, from me or from anyone else." He struggled to meet her gaze, ashamed of his earlier behavior. Sarah looked at him thoughtfully, her expression calm and steady. There was no anger in her eyes, only a quiet understanding that seemed far beyond her difficult circumstances. "People do desperate things when they're hurting, Ethan," she said softly. "Revenge might feel good for a moment, but treating others poorly doesn't heal your own pain. It just spreads more hurt." Her simple wisdom cut Ethan deeper than any accusation could have. He realized how empty his pursuit of revenge had been, how much damage he had almost caused, not just to Sarah, but to himself. "You're right," he admitted, the words heavy with newfound humility. He reached for his wallet, pulling out the promised payment, but hesitated. "This feels inadequate." He then offered something more, not just the money, which he still gave her, but genuine help. He offered connections to housing resources, help finding a job that utilized the clear intelligence she possessed, access to training programs, whatever she needed to rebuild her life, offered without expectation or condescension. Sarah listened quietly, considering his offer. She accepted the money, knowing it was a necessary step. She also accepted his offer of further help, but she did so on her own terms, with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. She wasn't looking for a handout, but an opportunity, a hand up. Ethan learned a profound lesson that night, one that wealth and success had never taught him. He learned about the emptiness of bitterness, the ugliness of judging others based on appearances, and the surprising strength found in kindness and authenticity. He saw that a person's true worth had absolutely nothing to do with their bank balance or their address. Sarah, with the resources Ethan provided and her own unwavering spirit, slowly began to piece her life back together, finding stable housing and pursuing opportunities she hadn't dared to dream of before. Ethan, humbled and changed, started volunteering his time and resources, finding a deeper sense of purpose in helping others than his millions had ever provided. Their paths diverged, but the encounter had irrevocably changed them both. A stark reminder that sometimes the most unexpected people teach us the most valuable lessons about life, compassion, and the true meaning of worth. Please remember to share, like, and subscribe to this channel. Also, don't forget to turn on post notifications to be among the first to watch our videos. See you in the next video.